What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, January 7th, 2019, getting into the year, getting into the month, and we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Sam is in our control room today, basically taking care of all the tech issues, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and observations here. Now, we have got a lot of stuff to go through today, so I'm going to ask you all a favor on this Monday. It's okay for you to call in, but don't call in just to hear yourself on the radio or take us off topic or anything, and keep it short because we really do have a lot to get through. So let's get right on into it. All right, so as you know, we're now in the grip of the 116th Congress, and what we're seeing happening, I think, should be alarming to Americans. The first Senate bill of 2019 was the one they put through to try and protect Israel from the boycott. Now, look at all that's going on with our country. The government is shut down. Our infrastructure is crumbling. The border is wide open. What's the first thing the senators think of? Oh, we got to take care of Israel. We got to make sure that Israel is happy. I hope Americans are looking at that. In fact, when you talk to people, when you go out, just say, think of everything that's wrong with this country. What's the first thing the incoming Senate does? Oh, they vote to protect Israel from being boycotted, which, by the way, will never survive a Supreme Court challenge because it's an assault on our First Amendment right to freedom of expression. So, meanwhile, over in the House of Representatives, again, in the context of all that is going wrong with our country that needs to be dealt with, Nancy Pelosi and the House Democrats introduced a bill that would immediately restore voting rights for all convicted felons nationwide. Got to swell up those voter rolls for 2020. We got to get them, once they've completed their prison sentences, get them back on the voter rolls here. This bill, which is called the For the People Act, would also mandate automatic voter registration nationwide for eligible voters that provide information to state government agencies such as the DMV. Here is the problem. We know, at least in the case of the California DMV, they're not checking if voters are eligible. It's just automatic. Here's your driver's license. Here's your voter's registration. Next. Now, Pelosi is introducing yet another bill that would demand that presidents and vice presidents, and obviously this is aimed at Trump and Pence. She wants them kicked out of office at the same time. That would actually make her president under the laws of succession. But what's really interesting is she wants this bill where presidents and vice presidents have to provide 10 years of their tax returns to the public in the name of transparency. However, Congress itself is exempt. They get to keep their tax records private from you, the American people. So you don't know where their money is coming from, or just how it is that on a member of Congress salary, so many of them become multimillionaires. There's just something funny about that. Of course, I still think that in the Project for the New American Century, all members of government ought to be dressed in NASCAR jumpsuits and ought to have the patches of everybody who pays them or bribes them or lobbies for them, just so the patches on the outside. After a while, it may look like a clown suit, but at least you could take a look and find out who these people really are working for, because they are not working for you. It's very obvious at this point. And again, all the problems with this country, all the things that are going wrong, and they're already out there. Oh, let's make Israel happy. Let's start working toward 2020. Now, as you know, there is still a stalemate going on about the southern border fence. There were rumors that a deal might be happening. But apparently Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are still digging in their heels and saying, no, no, no fence. And what's really interesting is last week, the Director of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen, basically in a hearing laid out all of the facts about illegal immigration, the problems it's causing. These are the facts, not propaganda, not guesses, not divine revelation, the absolute hardcore facts. And Nancy Pelosi just gets up there saying, I reject your facts, which of course triggered a confrontation where Kirstjen Nielsen is saying, these are the facts. You don't just get to say yes and no. And Pelosi said, I'm saying no, I reject your facts. We're going to have our open borders. All right, we're going to do our shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Apparently, one of the big issues that Nancy Pelosi was upset about was the Department of Homeland Security's analysis of just how many criminal illegal immigrants sneak across that border every single year. Now, Donald Trump is on his way down to that border to basically do a fact-finding trip or to get some, photo ops, media op, talking with the people who are actually down there dealing with the mess. The latest incarnation of the fence is going to be a steel slat fence. And Trump talked about that last week in one of his press conferences, stressing the idea that it will be built with American steel, which is going to help revitalize our steel industry. And he's absolutely correct on that one. Now, looking at the design of the fence, it looks like it's not going to stop the most clever of spelunkers, but it will be a serious, serious impediment. But again, a fence is only as good as you're willing to back up the immigration law behind it. And that's why we have this immigration problem. Nobody's been enforcing Title VIII, either against the illegal immigrants or against all of these Americans who are feeding them, clothing them, housing them, giving them work. All these mayors and governors who are saying sanctuary this and sanctuary that. And again, back in 2009, there was talk about a bill. There was actually a bill, the Secure Borders Act of, I think it was 2006. And back then, all the Democrats were fully on board. And over at the Political Insider, they have posted one of the videos. This is from 2009, where Chuck Schumer gave a speech at the 6th Annual Immigration Law and Policy Conference at Georgetown University. And basically he got up there saying that a fence will make the border far more secure, and that will be a significant barrier to illegal immigration. Back then, Chuck Schumer was exactly on the same page as Donald Trump. But today, because Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi hate Donald Trump, they're going to reverse that policy. And it's not about immigration, and it's not about money, and it's not about health. It's just a play for power. Who's really in control of the government? And that, unfortunately, seems to be a little bit up in the air. And we're going to get into that a little bit later in the show. Meanwhile, what everybody is ignoring is the fact that the government shutdown has already cost more than the $5.6 billion he wants to build the border wall. It's just resulting in all kinds of costs. The other part that people refuse to think about is that it's costing far more than $5.6 billion to provide medical services for illegal immigrants and for all the babies they're popping out just as fast as they can once they're on this side of the fence. And Trump's wall is a one-time purchase. There'll be a little maintenance down the road a little bit, but the cost for providing medical services and welfare and who knows what else, food stamps, for the illegal immigrants in this country, it continues year after year after year after year. The other day we were talking about the farm bill which passed, and everybody's saying, wow, a farm bill, $860 billion. Why is it that high? Because 80% of it is food stamps. That's why. Now, down in Yuma, Arizona, Yuma County Sheriff Leon Wilmot, who's a former Marine, is out there saying the fence they put up cut crime in Yuma by 91%. And he's got some harsh words for all these politicians, saying that, first of all, the sheriffs and the border people need a bigger seat at the table. If you're going to talk about border security, talk to the people who are really tasked with doing it, which Donald Trump did last week. And Sheriff Wilmot was saying, we see all these interviews in Washington with mayors and governors, but they're not the ones down there on the border. They're not the ones investigating the crimes. They're not the ones standing around in 120-degree heat processing a crime scene where 14 people were left to die in the desert. And he's absolutely got it right. For all those open border people, for all the liberals, it's an abstraction. You know, it's just this very fuzzy, fluffy concept of, oh, open borders are going to be wonderful. They themselves have never had to confront the reality of what their policies are bringing into this country here. And I would like to remind everybody that Ted Cruz came up with a really good idea. Remember El Chapo, the drug lord? They finally arrested him. They caught him. His real name is Joaquin Guzman. He's worth $14 billion, all of which are subject to seizure under the RICO statutes. So you take $14 billion from El Chapo, you give Donald Trump his $5.5 billion for the wall, and look how much you've got left over for other domestic works inside this country. That was the original reason for civil forfeiture and RICO, was to take the proceeds from criminals and put them back to work in our society. Not give the police a reason to plunder the American people and buy coffee machines with it. Now, the government shutdown is continuing, and supposedly if there is no resolution by midnight tomorrow night, paychecks are going to start being missed. Apparently, the Department of Homeland Security is saying that literally hundreds of TSA officers are calling in sick to work because they need to actually go out and find paying jobs, paying labor, so that they can pay their rent, their mortgages, and so forth. Apparently, 170 agents called in sick every day this week at Kennedy International Airport in New York. And I'll tell you right now, Claire is really going to miss those guys. Apparently, a lot of the Internal Revenue Service agents are on furlough. And they're now saying that tax refunds are going to be held up. That is causing a scramble amongst the tax preparation software people who are trying to lure people in with an immediate refund advance. Because the longer it takes for the actual refund check to arrive, the more it costs these tax preparation companies in the interest on the money they have borrowed to give to the tax filers. So it's just a real mess. Okay, looking over at domestic politics, this has been popping up all over the independent media, but finally it's up here on the Hill, where apparently there was exculpatory evidence about Mike Flynn and his relationship with Russia that U.S. intelligence kept secret so that he could be railroaded, driven out of office, and hounded and persecuted. The actual information U.S. intelligence had about Mike Flynn and his interactions with Russia is that he was clearly working for U.S. interests. He was actually a benefit. And just think about some common sense. If Mike Flynn was involved with some kind of Russian collusion plot, why would he announce his trip in advance? So, now, again, look at all the things going wrong with this country. And already, all the politicians can think of 2020, 2020, 2020. So, David Brock who is a Clinton crony, is out there now saying that Bernie supporters must be silenced for the 2020 primaries because, oh my goodness, they just messed everything up. You know, they put up this real fight against Hillary Clinton, which we already knew was supposed to be the nominee. And then after she won the nomination, those Bernie supporters, they were complaining about being cheated and they were complaining about election fraud, and that helped swing the election to Donald Trump, and we can't let that happen ever again. So those Bernie Sanders supporters, they have to be shut up for 2020. David, have you ever heard of something called the First Amendment? Because what you're talking about here is flat out tyranny, silencing a group of people that you do not agree with. Now, a lot of people are looking at that Steele dossier and its aftermath and wondering just what exactly was the backstory on that. And it really began to go public as an artifact that came about when Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, their text messages were released. They were made public. So you had here these two senior Justice Department officials just engaged in this petty, vitriolic political diatribe while making decisions on the most sensitive investigations of the 2016 political season. They were clearly not objective. They were not unbiased. They should have been removed. Their hatred toward Trump was on full display to everybody. And it even got so bad that finally Mueller had to remove him from his team the moment the Justice Department Inspector General Michael Horowitz told him about the text messages. Strzok was dismissed from the FBI. Further investigations are continuing. But a lot of people are saying, well, if they had all of this set up, if they had the Steele dossier, if they had all of this other information ready to go, why didn't they use it during the 2016 campaign to just knock Trump out of the election? And the story that is emerging now is that Hillary genuinely believed she could beat Donald Trump with all the illegal immigrant voting and the election fraud and the rest of it. And the Steele dossier was the insurance policy. Remember when you go back and you look at those text messages from Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, and they were talking about how, no, Trump will never be president. They were talking about an insurance policy. That's what the Steele dossier was all about. So that Hillary Clinton, after she lost, could step up and say, the election was stolen by Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, and I demand to be made president. Now, why she was unable to move forward with that, we do not know yet. Maybe somebody basically came on in and said this could trigger a revolution, it could trigger rioting, it could trigger a constitutional crisis. And, okay. Let's see. We have a caller on the line, the Gangster O Love, and that's from North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, you were talking about General Flynn and the exculpatory evidence and how he was railroaded, and we see this happening a lot. Just for us little guys out here, dissident voices, when they come for us at 4 o'clock in the morning, why should we go if we know that we probably too are going to be railroaded? Why should we go?
Well, that's a decision you're going to have to make on an individual by individual basis. And, but yeah, we live in a time right now where our justice system is not just. We saw them still continuing to cover up for the Clintons, the Clinton Foundation, and all the corruption. So it's a difficult question to ask and even more difficult to answer. Anyway, Gangster, we got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about our domestic politics, and Special Counsel Robert Mueller's federal grand jury has been given a 6-month extension. Now, their original 18-month term was set to expire right about now. And so the corporate media's out there saying, see, the Russia investigation, it isn't finished. Yeah, it is. It was finished a long time ago. They've had 18 months and they've come up with absolutely nothing about Russian collusion. So let's go for another 6 months and spend all that money and come up with nothing there. Now, one of the most interesting developments, as you know, Adam Schiff, who's definitely anti-Trump, he's now the chair of the Intelligence Committee. And rather than dealing with issues of national intelligence, he's already said he is going to be coordinating with Robert Mueller to see if they can find anybody in Mueller's investigation who committed perjury. They're going to be sharing information back and forth. It's like the entire machinery of government have become obsessed with getting Donald Trump to the point where they're willing to let the rest of the nation just fall apart behind them. Yeah, oh, so that bridge fell down. Well, it was getting old anyway here. And so the border's wide open. And so we've got, all these illnesses across. The important thing is we've got to get Donald Trump because he's not a globalist. So Schiff is already out there saying he is going to use this committee to keep pushing on this whole idea of Russian election meddling in 2016. They're unwilling to let go. All righty, over at the Pentagon, acting U.S. Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan is praising his chief of staff, Kevin Sweeney, as he steps down. And Sweeney is apparently a Navy officer with over 30 years of service, and then chief of staff at the Pentagon. And he's saying that basically he wants to re-enter the private sector, where he won't get as much pay here. But, we're getting a report from the Washington Examiner that Sweeney was forced out of the job by White House pressure. Now, it may be that this is the backlash from what's been happening over the Syria withdrawal, where, as you know, Trump has announced a Syria withdrawal, and then all of a sudden everybody say, "Oh no, it's not going to happen. Not going to happen. No, we know what's best. Pay no attention to that president. He's just look at all of us with ribbons on our chest and bright shiny medals and everything, and we know what's best for the country here." So as I mentioned a little earlier in the show, right now it's becoming kind of hard to tell exactly who is running the country. And we have a lot of people who seem to think they are. John Bolton has clearly gone against Trump's stated policies in the war zones. So has Mike Pompeo. You had Nancy Pelosi in that ridiculous interview in the New York Times where she said the Constitution makes her the equal of the president. No, it does not. And I'm sure that Chuck Schumer is out there trying to get his hand on the steering wheel of the country as well. So you have all these different people, all of whom see themselves as actually being the power, if not on the throne, at least behind the throne. Got a handful of modern J. Edgar Hoovers just causing all kinds of chaos inside our nation. Now, speaking of Nancy Pelosi, oddly enough, she stands pretty much alone on this, she's refusing to condemn Rashida Tlaib's Trump impeachment comment, where she basically was at a swearing-in party thrown for her by MoveOn.org, and she came on out and said, we're going to impeach that MF, and you can fill in the blanks here. And it's drawn condemnations from a lot of people on both sides of the aisle. It's very unseemly. It basically ruins the dignity that we presume Congress is supposed to have. But one Democrat, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, has basically stepped in and issued an apology to all Americans for Rashida's MF remark on President Trump. And it was great of him to do that. Because you can talk about impeachment all you want. That's legitimate. But to use profanity in a public setting, what do you think this is? The British Parliament, where they just yell and scream at each other and everybody goes, "Hear, hear," and they There are rules on the conduct of members of Congress, and there are certain expectations how they're going to behave out in public when the voters can see them. Okay, we're coming up here on a commercial break, and when we come on back, we're going to be talking about Mitt Romney, who has stirred up a bit of a hornet's nest with his little op-ed. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And over at the Hill, they have an analysis of Mitt Romney's op-ed in the Washington Post against the foreign policy of Donald Trump. Now, everybody was focusing on the harsh rhetoric and the Twitter war that followed it. But the Hill is basically saying, reading very carefully Mitt Romney's commentary about the freedom agenda, basically shows that Mitt Romney is still ignorant of or oblivious to wartime casualties, an attitude that seems to infect the entire establishment. We don't care how many people get blown to bits. We want that pipeline right away. We want that opium. We want that land. We want to be in the history books here. All those other people, who cares? Remember what Henry Kissinger said about military people? They're just dumb, stupid pawns to be used for foreign policy. That is the prevailing attitude. How can you follow leaders who are that callous about throwing your lives away? All right, we're going to take a phone call now. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I wonder if the Union of Concrete Makers is mad at Trump for going to a steel wall instead of a concrete wall.
I imagine that probably there were a lot of people who were looking forward to selling a lot of concrete, and they're probably American providers as well. But Trump has made a big focus on steel, and ultimately I think the steel is probably going to cost a lot less.
Do you think this thing's ever going to be built? You know, like it's already 2019. You know, do you see? I just don't see this. I don't see it, Mike. It's just too much blocking him, and then this or that. He should, like you said, you have that drug dealer El Chapo. Why can't you just take that money? Or why can't you just pull money out of like the Pentagon's budget? That's national security, and so is the wall. So I don't understand this dragging out per se. You know what I mean?
Well,
he has the ability
again, it's about demonstrating who's actually in charge of the government. And Donald Trump apparently does have the legal authority to declare a state of emergency along that southern border, just like you would for Hurricane Katrina or a major earthquake or anything else. And there is discretionary money to deal with these states of emergency. And he could do that. But of course, Congress would come on back and say he's running rampant, he's a tyrant, he's just doing this on his own. This is all about who is perceived by the American people as running this country. And like I said, you've got Donald Trump, who's unfortunately proving to be very weak and easy to sway. You've got John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, who are just flagrantly pursuing their own agendas in the war zones without regard to what the president wants. And then you have Nancy Pelosi, who already thinks she's the equal of the president and dreams of Mike Pence and Donald Trump disappearing in a flash of light so that she can be president for real. And you have Chuck Schumer. It's all about who's being seen, and it makes the government even more unstable than it has been before.
And isn't it amazing they got a 6-month extension to investigate? We all know the Russian thing's a fraud. They're going to keep extending it. Look, they already called him all the names, right? Like in the book.
They want to take it into 2020. They want to go into the 2020 campaign season saying, you know, the president is still under investigation for Russian collusion. That's what their plan is. They're going to stretch it on. I feel sorry for those grand jurors. They're never going to be allowed to get out of that and get on with their lives until after the 2020 election.
I just don't see anything good happening, like now, Mike. No. I just don't see anything good. I think it's finished because it's just like you see what Washington has become.
Yes.
this oligarchy of, like bringing democracy around the world and all that, and Mitt Romney coming out with his op-ed, even though Mitt Romney's own family says they come out against him.
Yes.
I mean, it's just a bizarre thing going on. And then that woman in Michigan.
Let me make a point here, okay? Let me make a point here. Mitt Romney is being talked about now, and that may have been the real reason for it, or one of the reasons for it, because I think Romney's going to step in 2020. And so in order to do that, he's got to get the American people paying attention to him and talking about him right now. This may not have been the most carefully well thought out way of getting his name in front of the American people. But in Hollywood, where I used to work, there was a saying that even bad publicity is better than no publicity.
Hey, Mike, did you mention Trump's supposed to be on TV tomorrow night?
Yeah, he is, and we're already hearing that the networks may refuse to carry his speech live, instead preferring to, as I'm trying to remember who it was last week, somebody in the corporate media saying, we should have the right to edit Trump's speeches because of all the falsehoods he says, like, the corporate media lies and cover-ups and changes what we're saying. So that's going to be a big stink as well if the networks drop him. And instead they just come up with carefully selected highlights in the late night news. That's going to be a big stink as well.
But I
thought Trump was going to start his own media center. When he first came into office, there was talk about a Trump. He was going to set up literally his own TV network, his own internet feed station, sort of to get away from Twitter and Google and Facebook and the existing networks here. And heck, I wanted a job. I would have gone to work for him on that. I'm not so sure today, but I don't know where that went either. But it looks like the corporate media, they're trying to build a wall around Donald Trump. Wall at the south of the country, bad. Wall around Donald Trump, good.
We already got Trump TV. It's just, unfortunately, all negative. But, all right, Mike, have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Turning over to the war zones, of which there are so many. Taliban fighters are now threatening major oil wells near the northern Afghan city of Saripul, following days of fighting in which dozens of members of the security forces have been killed and wounded. The Taliban are winning. Slowly but surely, they are winning. At the end of 2001, they were all but gone. And over the intervening years, slowly, they have recaptured much of Afghanistan. And I think the people of Afghanistan, and even the current government, they're tired of it. It's been going on for, 18 years now, 17 years now. And they would like it to go away. Of course, the oil companies still want access to that very inexpensive to use pipeline. And the American drug lords are not going to let go of that supply of opium coming out of Afghanistan. So we'll see what happens there. All right, let's talk about Trump's Syria pullout and forget what he's saying today about not setting a deadline. When he first announced it, he said somewhere between 30 and 100 days is what he said. And immediately the hemming and hawing started. And last week they were saying, some troops could remain in South Syria after the pullout in order to counter the Iranian threat. Then John Bolton came on out and said that the withdrawal from Syria was actually conditional, and it wasn't going to happen unless Turkey made a firm commitment not to target the Kurdish inside Syria, who America sees as allies. Well, that's never going to happen. And then they said basically that the U.S. will stay in Syria until ISIS is fully defeated. Well, ISIS is pretty much all but gone. But all the United States has to say is our intelligence agencies say that there is ISIS still hiding out in Bashar al-Assad's spare bathroom. So, and the troops will stay in there. Today, now, the State Department has come on out well, actually last Friday, the State Department said the U.S. Has no timeline for the Syria withdrawal. And so they've just sent a message. Pay no attention to what that man in the Oval Office is saying, because he is not calling the shots. The deep state is. And the deep state wants more war. Here a war, there a war, everywhere a war, E-I-E-I-O. And I'm not the only one who's noticed that. Article over at Global Research saying, has Trump been outmaneuvered on the Syria troop withdrawal? Really, is this a trick question? Because my answer would be yes. So Global Research is out there saying Trump's possible backtracking. Well, it's not possible. It's definite now. Withdrawing from Syria means that he may once again have been outmaneuvered by the deep state. This is from Virginia State Senator Dick Black. And even Dick Black is saying, this all seemed to pivot with that meeting with Senator Lindsey Graham, who visited the White House on December 30th, had a meeting with Donald Trump, and immediately after that, it all started coming apart. So my sympathies to those of you who have family serving in Syria, and you thought they were coming home. That was going to be your Christmas present or your New Year's present. I'm sorry, it's not happening. Story coming out of Russia today, Bolton is now threatening Damascus with a strong response if there's another chemical attack. Bolton is signaling a new false flag chemical attack, which would provide political cover for the U.S. to remain inside Syria. And again, there is no reason for Assad to engage in chemical attacks. We know the U.S.-backed jihadis have been. But to learn if you're being lied to, look for what should be there and isn't. And what isn't here is a motive for Assad to use chemical weapons. He's all but won the war. He doesn't need to use chemical weapons. He knows that the use of chemical weapons is exactly what the United States wants, so they can go on illegally occupying his country. Assad's main task right now is to convince the United States to get out from where it's not really wanted. And that's what this is really all about. So there may be another false flag chemical attack. They're going to blame Assad and say, see, we can't leave Syria now. Ooh, the evil Assad, he's using chemical weapons. He doesn't have a reason to do that. Oh, it doesn't matter. Assad is insane. You shouldn't listen to him. Just take it from us. This is all Assad's fault. Would we lie to you? Heck yeah. Apparently, Bolton is also out there saying that the United States is, quote, very supportive, end quote, of Israeli strikes against Iranian targets in Syria. Now, this may get a little bit tricky, because if Israel flies into Syria with their older aircraft, they're sitting ducks for the Russian air defense system. If they fly in with an F-35 and just one of those gets shot down, it's an epic disaster for Lockheed, because the plane is a $1 trillion boondoggle. It's a poor dogfighter. It's still not complete. They've put it into combat service, but it's still missing parts of it. Its only selling point is it's supposed to be invisible to radar. And if it turns out that's not true, if it can be seen and shot down, well, then it's simply not worth the money. And you're going to see nations canceling their sales. So I'm not sure what Bolton is really thinking. But this could turn out to be a no-win situation for Israel and the United States. Meanwhile, Netanyahu is pressuring John Bolton to have the United States recognize Israel's claim to the Golan. Now, Israel basically grabbed the Golan during a previous war with Syria, and declared its annexation, which was not recognized by any other government on earth. If you talk to Syria, they own the Golan. They're already selling the oil and gas rights there. They wanted a pipeline through Syria to send that oil and gas to Europe, and Assad said, no, I'm not going to let you build a pipeline so you can sell the oil and gas you stole from Syria. That was one of the motivators for the Syrian war. Well, now Israel is building another pipeline that actually goes across the floor of the Mediterranean. But the rest of the world is out there. They do not recognize that Israel owns the Golan. But Netanyahu is pushing on Bolton. Given that the United States sort of set the precedent of moving the embassy to Jerusalem instead of Tel Aviv, Netanyahu is hoping that the U.S. will say, we recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. It is now part of Israel. Mahi dictum est. And the rest of the world will scurry to follow, just like they did not do to move their embassies to Jerusalem. But Netanyahu is out there saying Israel has a right to the Golan. We have a right to that. And I'm not sure where that's coming from. I hope it's not from the Bible, because the biblical description of Israel cuts them a huge, huge chunk of real estate all across the Middle East. Netanyahu may be out there saying, yeah, it's God's will. You don't want to go against God, do you? If you don't give us the Golan and, all of the Middle East from the Nile to the Euphrates, God will smite you down. By the way, for those of you who don't know, that's what the two stripes on the top and bottom of the flag of Israel signify. The Euphrates River and the Nile River, the borders of Israel as it's described in the Bible. Now, there's another little aspect that is becoming a problem. As you know, every couple of days, the Syrian forces will uncover caches of U.S. and Israeli weapons, but we don't know how many are still in there. And apparently there is a concern that the jihadis could use the United States missiles against the United States troops. Talk about hoisting with your petard. We got to take a break for commercials. We got a caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And we're just now getting this story. It's an interesting development. Apparently, over at the Department of Defense, there is $93 billion with a B in unobligated funds. In other words, it's just sitting there. And Donald Trump apparently is considering simply taking that money to reopen the government without Congress having put through a spending bill. And that would keep the government running for a little while longer. And that's kind of a brilliant move because it's going to shift the onus back onto the Congress in the eyes of the public. He's going to have his money for his border wall. And all of those federal agencies, they're going to be very grateful to Donald Trump and not so warm and fuzzy toward the United States Congress, which put them in this mess to begin with. So every once in a while, Trump does a good move, and this looks like it could be one of them. All right, let's take a phone call. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, two things. One is as far as with Syria and Bolton goes, let's just understand something about Bolton. Bolton was put in there at the behest of the Mercers and Sheldon Adelson, who basically run Breitbart News. Breitbart News is one of the biggest proponents of Bolton. So don't kid yourself about Breitbart being anything other but a shill for the deep state, not really independent media. Also, and Bolton's got to go if he wants to have a successful administration still. Trump has got to fire this clown. Has got to fire him now. As far as the BDS goes, we talked about earlier.
Yes.
Nobody in mainstream media that I could tell is even talking about this. Unfortunately, including I heard InfoWars today. I wanted to see anything, not a peep out of that. So I'm telling you, Mike, this country is in very, very bad trouble. Our Constitution is under attack. Our country is under attack. This is a vicious. I don't care if you're for Israel, against Israel, neutral, or whatever you are. This is a foreign country. This is not the United States we're talking about. They have this kind of influence on this country that they can even destroy our Constitution, our First Amendment. This is a direct attack on the First Amendment. If
Yes,
they
it
can get
is.
away with this, I'm afraid the U.S. is finished.
Somebody's going to have to take this all the way up to the Supreme Court and get a ruling saying the First Amendment is an absolute, and there is no way the current Supreme Court is going to say, yeah, we can have an Israel exception to the First Amendment. That, I think, that might even trigger rioting in the streets of America. I'm hearing so much anger out there in the hinterland. It's like France. It's just going to take one spark, and we're all going to be putting on those yellow vests.
Yeah, because it's just underneath the surface.
Yeah.
Mainstream media may not be, corporate media might not be reporting on it. Even people like InfoWars might be looking the other way on this now with today, this everlasting disgrace. But people know about it. I get I cut my cable. I get most of my news, almost all of my news out of YouTube and things like that, and shows like yours. Okay, and you see the comments.
Okay, Mark, I got to put you on hold.
Yeah.
We got to do a station identification. Stay on the line. We'll come right back to you. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. We're talking with Mark in North Carolina. We're talking about the situation in Syria. We're actually talking about the fact that the United States is in serious, serious trouble. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that our government just seems totally under the control of Israel and, or rather the government of Israel and its supporters, such as Sheldon Adelson, and very wealthy pro-Israel billionaires who are not shy about using their money to try and remake the world the way they think it ought to be. And George Soros is another one of them. And as I said up at the top of the show, when we were talking about, the new incoming Senate, just starting to get down to business. And with all the things that are wrong with this country, what's the first thing they do? They pass a resolution to outlaw boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. You American people, you just get to the back of the bus here. We've got to take care of Israel here. You Americans, we got your votes. We're elected now, and we're coming up on taking your money. You don't matter anymore. We've got to take care of almighty Israel. Mark, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. It's just awful. Because I'll be honest with you. If you took a actual Nazi or let's say an all-out Jew hater, not an anti-Zionist, but a Jew hater, and asked them to cook something up, that's what I would think. That's what he'd likely cook up, something like this to really cause hatred of Jews. Plain and simple. I mean, this is just disgusting. This is again, this is an assault on our Constitution. It's an assault everything we love in this country. And by the way, don't think for a second that what's going on in Syria right now with Bolton in his big fat mouth, and Trump starting to waver on getting out of there. It's not connected to the Israeli lobby. Of course it is.
Yes.
Just like I said, it's just the fact that Bolton is the NSA guy, the National Security Advisor right now, is because of Zionist backers like Adelson, and I'm not sure if what the Mercers are, but I know they were big supporters of.
Again, as I said before, one of the motivators for the war in Syria was that Syria refused to give a right of way for Israel to build a pipeline to send the oil and gas from Golan to Europe. And talk about chutzpah to have even asked in the first place. But the good news is that while Israel still claims to represent all the world's Jewish people, that's starting to be less and less true. And there was an article I read, it was only last week, saying that there is a real schism opening up between American Jews and what's going on over in Israel, where American Jews, while they stay silent because of religious prohibitions, it's actually wired into the religion, you're not allowed to criticize other Jews, they're becoming very unhappy with what's going on in Israel, mostly because it reflects badly on them. And
yeah, one of the biggest
they no longer want to be conflated with what they're seeing over there in Gaza and the occupied territories. So some of them are beginning to speak out, and they're not signing as many checks as they used to.
Yeah, well, Glenn Greenwald is one of them. I mean, he's really outspoken about this, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, like you said, there are a lot of Jews. I told you before, I don't know if you remember, I told you I'm of Jewish heritage myself. I don't practice the religion, but, you know, if I go back to my genetics, absolutely, you know what I mean? But the thing is this, I'm loyal to this country. I don't care about Israel. Israel means nothing to me. It's just another country.
Yes.
If I have a second country after the United States right now, it's Russia. Okay? So but my loyalty is still to the United States of America.
I have room in my heart for one. Let me make this clear. I have room in my heart for one and only one country, and that is the United States of America. And I have only one loyalty, and that is to the American people.
That's it. Exactly. That's the way I feel too. And our Constitution. Our Constitution is, you know, people talk about American exceptionalism. The real American exceptionalism is our Constitution. As far as I know, no nation ever came up with a document like that, granting what our Constitution granted us. It's not just a democracy; it's a republic. It's a constitutional republic.
That's exactly what it is, and it was truly revolutionary for its time, because when Thomas Jefferson and the boys wrote this system, came up with this system, it was still a world dominated by royalty. And monarchies, and that system. So it's not like today where other countries will say we're going to write up a constitution, and they write up something that's more or less based on the constitutions that have come before. Thomas Jefferson and the Founding Fathers, they really went outside the box. And I think one of the great failings of education in our schools is that young people are not really made aware of just how radical the United States of America was compared to the other nations around the world at the time, including lack of a monarch, lack of a state-sanctioned religion, lack of private central banking, although we weren't able to stay out of that mess for all that long. It truly was a revolutionary system, and it was inspiring to the rest of the world. When the French Revolution came along, the first one, not the one that's happening now, but the first one, they were inspired by what had happened in the United States of America, and they wanted to emulate that.
Yeah, and what you get a lot of times is that, well, they had slaves at the time. Well, guess what? They also came up with a remedy for that, called amending the Constitution, the amendments to the Constitution.
Yes.
Okay? They thought of just about everything, including George Washington thought about what's happening today, I think. He must have seen into the future or something when he said, avoid foreign entanglement. And boy, was he right. So
well, I don't think he needed to see into the future so much, is that he was well aware of the history of Europe. I mean, we think of George Washington as the first president, the founding father of America, but he came from a European background. And a lot of European history was his own family history, and he had seen how so much bloodshed and misery in Europe was caused by nations getting caught up in each other's affairs, getting all these royal marriages that crossed borders to try and achieve more lands and so forth. And so Washington didn't want that, because he knew that this new United States of America, as radically different as it was from the rest of the world, was, for that very reason, it was fragile. And that was why he didn't want the foreign entanglements. It was why there was no state religion, no religion, because they had, for them, the schism between the Protestants and the Catholics in Europe, and especially Great Britain, that was fairly recent history for them. and they didn't want to see that happen here.
Mike, just one more thing. Actually, what could you have Adam Green from No More News and maybe T West from Afri Energy? I think it's called Afri Synergy. On those guys are great. They're on YouTube basically, and I think they're awesome. I'd love you to have them on if you could.
Would you
right?
email me their names and channels so that I can take a look at them after the radio show? Okay.
Okay, Adam Green is one of them. Like I said, he's on No More News. That's what the KNOW More News. Okay,
by the end of the show, I will have forgotten about it. I don't have room on this desk for a notepad.
Okay.
Okay. Just shoot that to me.
Okay, I'll do that then.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Getting on back to the war zones in Syria, apparently the neoconservatives in the Trump administration, Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, and James Jeffrey, are scrambling to save their plans for Syria that basically started to fall apart when Trump ordered a complete withdrawal, which from their point of view was a retreat. Well, apparently that's already been undone. But you need to understand that the plans coming from Bolton and Jeffrey and Pompeo were for a permanent U.S. occupation of northeast Syria, a reduction of Iranian influence within the government-held parts of Syria, and an eventual disposal of the Syrian government under President Assad. But Trump had never signed off on any of those ideas. These lesser officials just went on out and said, we're going to do this. This is the danger of the true believers. And it's a name given to people who rise so high within a power structure. They're so close to the ruler, they can smell the ruler's bad breath. And they think that gives them magical authority. And very often they will take policy into their hands because they truly believe they know what's best. They serve a higher purpose. It's okay for them to break the law, break international law. They serve that higher purpose. And they have gotten us into so much trouble throughout history. And it's one of the reasons why I'm concerned over Trump's weakness. Trump apparently tried to stand firm and block Bolton, Pompeo, and Jeffrey by saying, I'm pulling the troops out, but somehow or other, they got him to back down. So it again begs the question, who's really in charge? Who's calling the shots here? We don't know. Now, apparently, U.S. airstrikes have killed 11 civilians in eastern Syria, and this has been confirmed by the Syrian government. The attacked village was on the outskirts of the town of Shofa, one of 3 so-called ISIS towns that have been getting pounded by U.S. airstrikes for months. The Syrian government reported, added there were huge property losses related to the attack. So they're just bombing the heck out of everything. Among the 11 people killed, local groups identified 2 women and 4 children. The U.S. has yet to make any comment on the matter, either why the village was attacked or why people were killed. But then that's normal for the United States. It's like, it's not worth talking about here. Apparently, at another coalition airstrike in Syria, 2 Russian nationals have been killed. And that is going to ramp things up. They're not military, they're civilians, but they were Russian nationals. So, anyway. And there's apparently another plan that is underway, whether or not Trump knows about it or has signed off about it. We can't tell anymore because of what Bolton and Pompeo and Jeffrey did in Syria. We don't know who's really in charge and who's calling these shots here. People are going to say, oh, it's Trump's this and Trump's that. No, it's not Trump anymore. Toward the end of the Merovingian kings, just before the Vatican helped overthrow them, put in the Carolingians, they went through a phase called the enfeebled rulers. Because the way their system was set up was when a Merovingian king would pass away, the kingdom would be split up among the heirs. And so the kingdoms got smaller and smaller and smaller, and the kings got weaker and weaker and weaker, until finally it was very easy for Carolus Magnus to come on in and just slap him upside of the head and say, I'm the boss now. We're starting to see that with Trump. He's an enfeebled president. According to this story over at Zero Hedge, there is apparently a plan, and this is coming from James Jeffrey, to basically partition Syria, to balkanize it. And of course, we already know they're going to break off the Golan and say this belongs to Israel. They're going to break off the northeast and say this is the new Kurdistan. And they may break off another chunk and say, well, this is going to go to Turkey. But that's the other plan that's out there. Speaking of Turkey, as we were talking about last Friday, the United States has come out with this either-or deal regarding missile defense. It's, if you're going to go with the S-400 or the Patriot, you can't have them both. And we demand that you cancel the purchase of the Russian S-400 system. Turkey has rejected that. And Russia has said they don't have a problem with Turkey having both systems, both the Patriot and the S-400. It's not an issue for them. So this now puts the United States government in a very difficult position. Are they going to allow Turkey to buy the Patriot system, which is going to make the military-industrial complex very happy, or are they going to cancel the sale to Turkey, which is going to upset a lot of people with defense contractor stocks in their portfolio? Apparently, the United States is now enhancing their military buildup in western Iraq, and they're deploying large groups of soldiers in western Iraq at a number of forces earlier stationed in Syria. And apparently, a lot of these U.S. troops that were in Syria have relocated to Ain al-Assad base in Al-Anbar province in western Iraq. A little reminder, the government of Iraq does not want them there. The government of Iraq does not intend to honor the sanctions against Iran. Iraq wants to move closer to Iran. They want the United States to leave here. But according to the sources that were coming out of FARS News, the U.S. forces are still stationed at the Iraq-Syrian borders and have not left Syria completely. Well, as it turns out, they're not leaving at all. They're probably heading back on into where they were before. I can imagine those kids must be very, very angry. They're being told by the president, you get to go home. You get to see your family. You get to hold your kids. You get to just, relax and start that come down from being in a war zone. And all of a sudden, because of Pompeo and Bolton and Jeffrey, they're on their way back into the meat grinder. I'm sure they've got to be very, very angry about that. And as if that was not enough, the U.S. military is sending an additional 2,500 ground combat troops to Kuwait. Now, the deployment will include elements of the 82nd Airborne Division's 2nd Brigade Combat Team, which is out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. About 1,700 soldiers from the same unit are overseers now, spread between Iraq and Kuwait. So the U.S. is trying to garrison the entire Middle East. I think it's a change in strategy. They're not able to pick off the countries one by one like, they haven't picked any of them off. They're stuck in these quagmires. So now they're just going to garrison the Middle East and say, you do what we tell you, because we've got military all over the place, and we'll do nasty things. Now, Mike Pompeo has launched a Middle East tour to try and galvanize the region against Iran. He's going to all these Middle Eastern countries and saying, Iran secretly hates you. Iran is secretly plotting against you. Ooh, boy, you better help us get Iran, or Iran's going to come and get you. So Pompeo's planning on meeting government leaders in Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Kuwait. And the goal of the trip, this is the giveaway quote here right now. The goal of the trip is to show nations in the Middle East that, quote, the United States is not leaving the Middle East, end quote. This is from a senior State Department official. So basically what they're trying to do is say, forget about how we're losing in Afghanistan, forget about how we're losing in Syria, we are not going anywhere and you'd better toe the line. Sig Heil, Sig Heil, Sig Heil, Sig Heil. But as I mentioned before, Iraq's foreign minister, they're rejecting the sanctions on Iran, and they are saying once again, it is time for the U.S. troops to leave. They have been here way beyond they were supposed to be. They are no longer welcome. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And there is this, shall we say, blowback from the revelation that the so-called Integrity Initiative was actually a British-funded PSYOP network. And it now turns out they played a key role in monitoring and molding all media narratives around the Sergei Skripal and Yulia Skripal case. In other words, they were managing the story. Now, do you remember when it first happened, when these two people were found, they were very, very ill. It was claimed that they had been targeted for this attack in a restaurant that had made several other people ill. That then went away because it turned out the restaurant where they had gotten sick was a pasta and seafood place. The Skripals apparently like seafood that includes shellfish, and shellfish can be very dangerous. And the symptoms that were being described did appear, at least peripherally, to be those of shellfish poisoning. And Novichok is supposed to be this insanely deadly nerve agent, and yet both the Skripals have survived, never to be seen again. But apparently this was seized on as an opportunity to demonize Russia, and that's where this, I love the name, the irony in the name, the Integrity Initiative, basically came on in. Now their public faces, we're here to fight Russian disinformation. No, their job was to put out disinformation against Russia. And that's big business. I mean, you can have the truth for a modest donation to Republic Broadcasting, but lying pays big bucks. It's a growth industry. It's the only part of the economy that's still healthy. They don't call it lying, they call it public relations. But that's basically what it is. Figuring out a way to lie to the public, to trick them. Like when Hill and Knowlton came up with that stolen incubator story that got Americans all hot and bothered to go into Iraq, after Kuwait. And it turned out to be a complete hoax and a complete fake. And PR firms make huge amounts of money doing this sort of thing. And then they go home at night, and I imagine they giggle into their scotch about how foolish people are and how easy it is to become rich, tricking foolish people into things here. So let's talk about the yellow vests, because it is starting to pop up all over the place. Apparently over in London, the Yellow Vests UK and the Yellow Vests South Cameroon, despite claims that the Yellow Vests UK were racist, they have now joined forces. They're operating as one single group. The Yellow Vests UK Patriots succeeded in shutting down the Westminster Bridge. Then they burned the flag of the European Union. That's sending a message, a very, very clear message. So France, again, it's still going on. It's not showing any sign of abating. In fact, it's growing. Apparently, that stunt of arresting one of their organizers did, in fact, backfire, as many expected. Cops are being beaten up. And it basically became a riot. They're calling it Act 8, Day of Rage. Marches were underway in several other cities across France and London. So, Alrighty, Yellow Vest protesters stormed the ministry in Paris. Protests involving 50,000 people turned violent in French cities. The Yellow Vests literally used a forklift to smash into this French government ministry building. And there are photos out there of guillotines. Now, I don't know that they're actually working. They rather look like slapdash put together to send a symbol. Now, here's an article coming out of Investment Watch blog, and it's asking a simple question. Why the protests bordering on government overthrow in France aren't getting much media attention? Well, the answer to that is obvious. They don't want you slaves getting uppity ideas. I mean, if you look at how much the French government has already capitulated to the Yellow Vests, our government doesn't want that sort of thing here. I mean, they've succeeded in basically rendering you completely impotent in the management of this country, between keeping you dependent, keeping you cocooned in a shell of media lies, compromising the election system. They're free from you. They don't have to do what the people want. So much for democracy. What an antiquated concept. We're going for globalism here. But it is spreading. And I'm sure it's making a lot of governments and politicians very nervous right now. Especially Macron is under a huge amount of pressure to resign and step down. And none of these people in these positions of power, they don't want to step down. Anyway, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the Yellow Vest protests here. And there's an interesting little article came out of stormcloudsgathering.com. The Yellow Vest protests are a canary in the coal mine. In other words, it's the warning of disaster on the way. Now, for those young people who don't really understand that phrase, the canary in the coal mine, when you're mining for coal or pretty much anything else, there's always a danger of running into methane gas. Now, the gas that comes out of your gas appliances in your home stinks, but that stink is actually added into it artificially because methane, as it comes from underground, is colorless, odorless, and tasteless. Can you imagine trying to go out on a date with somebody and she asks, what do you do for a living? And you have to say, I'm the guy who puts the stinky stuff in the natural gas. That's got to be rough on your dating life. But to get on back to the situation here, miners would take canaries in cages down into the mine with them and just keep an eye on them, because if they hit methane, the birds with their higher metabolism would be knocked unconscious. And that would be the warning for the miners to get on out. So that's what that phrase means for those of you who don't know. So the Yellow Vest protests are the canary in the coal mine. And the gist of the article is it would be folly to ignore the significance of this warning sign, because the Yellow Vest protests were never just about the fuel tax, because Macron caved in and canceled it. And the protests are continuing. And there is a deep undercurrent of discontent that's been rising all across Europe. And the conditions which are fueling it are accelerating it. And we're seeing the same thing happening here. Government taking too much from us, spending it on war, giving it away to their friends. The elites just with this attitude of unshakable entitlement to live off your labor. And the growing awareness of the population that no, that is not the way it is supposed to be here. And it is beginning to spread all over the world. We're in the 5th week of rallies against the Serbian leader. And they're out there saying, demonstrators carrying banners, we are the people, stop the treason, defend the Constitution, back the people, down with the thieves. The protesters are demanding electoral reform. Boy, do we need that here. Better living conditions for retirees. Also, we need that here. Public control over distribution of wealth and various anti-corruption measures. And this is the 5th week in a row they've been protesting against the country's president, Alexander Vucic. Over in Budapest, they're protesting there over Orban's so-called slave law. This is a new labor code which increased a worker's allowable overtime from 250 to 400 hours a year. Union leaders are very much against it, and they're claiming that this law, proposed by Viktor Orban's right-wing Fidesz party, wants to increase Hungarian company profits at the expense of workers by adding an extra work day per week. So they're unhappy over there. And we're seeing that everywhere. Forget about the 40-hour work week. It's 50-hour work week. That's standard. Last time I worked in computer animation was the 50-hour work week, Monday through Friday, 10 hours a day. And now they want 6-day work weeks. Just work them hard, get more money out of them. We're in a war. We're in a wartime economy. Everybody's got to work harder, or we could lose this thing. Newsflash, we're going to lose it anyway. Over in Sudan, the price of bread has triggered massive protests and threatens the government there, which has been in control for 30 years now. And the demonstrations began last December 19th in the city of Atbara after the government phased out wheat and fuel subsidies at the suggestion of international lenders. Why are the initials IMF floating in front of my eyes right now? So the protests have turned deadly. They spread to several towns in major cities, including Omdurman and the capital Khartoum. Now, to try and stop the uprising, authorities have basically cut internet connections. They've arrested opposition figures and critical journalists using tear gas to disperse crowds. The crowds are chanting, "The people want the fall of the regime." So it's spreading. Everybody's on edge. We've all been bled too dry. We've all been abused too much. There's only so far you can push a population. And you step over that line and it explodes on you. Nicolae Ceausescu learned that one the hard way. Just one step too far. Same thing with Charles the First, or Mussolini, or Louis the 16th. It would be a good idea to study the French Revolution and just see how the people went along with it, and went along with it, and went along with it, because the churches were saying, oh, the kings are appointed by God. You can't challenge them. You just do what you're told, and, render unto Rome that which is, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. That, by the way, is why that was written into the rewrite of the Bible, to just convince everybody, just go on and pay whatever taxes you're told to pay. And then finally, it just hit one point too far, and France exploded. And there's the original novel of A Tale of Two Cities. There's a lot of historical material about it. That movie they did, the version of Les Mis, is wonderful. I love that clip in there about Can You Hear the People Sing. There's also a wonderful stage play, which I got to participate in when I was back in college. And the short version of it is called Marat Sade. And it's basically a play within a play of the assassination of Jean-Paul Marat, who was one of the central figures of the French Revolution. He was a writer. He was confined to his bathtub by a skin disease, but he wrote prolifically, and it was printed up and set out as leaflets. And the play, within the play, is directed by the Marquis de Sade, and it's a brilliant, brilliant piece of writing by Peter Weiss. So you may want to look at that. That, too, has also been made into a movie. But I digress. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has announced he intends to move towards a World War II peace treaty with Russia during a summit in Russia later this month. Now, Russia and Japan obviously are getting along just fine right now, but apparently at the end of World War II, they started to put together a peace treaty, and it just sort of sat there, and apparently it has been hindered by a territorial dispute. So Abe is due to meet Russian President Putin on the 25th summit, where they're both expected to end a disagreement over a collection of islands seized by Soviet troops in the final days of the war. And Putin, they may just divvy them up, or Putin may just hand them back, and they'll sign that World War II peace treaty. It may just be symbolic, but it does seem to signal that Japan, like so many other countries, tired of bullying by the U.S. government, is moving into the Russian sphere of influence. Now, last week, the State Department issued a travel advisory saying that U.S. citizens could be subject to detention and prolonged interrogations because China was arbitrarily enforcing certain laws, and they advised Americans to get out of China, and if they had to stay in China for business or political reasons, to follow certain procedures to try and stay out of trouble. Well, this was a slap in the face to China. China's argument is with Canada, and so Xi Jinping last Friday has ordered the People's Liberation Army to enhance their combat readiness. Now, he's not elaborating what that means, but generally it means increased training schedules, more military exercises, and we're seeing that here. I mean, living here in Hawaii, where we have the highest per capita density of military bases, we've seen it in the last couple of weeks. A lot more iron over our heads, a lot more activity out there on the ocean. Getting on over into the Russia-Ukraine area, apparently the Ukrainian army has violated the ceasefire in the Donetsk People's Republic 6 times over the last 24 hours. And apparently they were shelling regions of Gorlovka, the settlement of Krutaya Balka, Dokochaevsk, the villages of Zabichevo, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce that last one. But it looks like Ukraine is getting ready to make a major move. In fact, it looks like the whole world is just getting ready to say, okay, starting time, the world war is on. You know, Claire was telling me before the radio show, it just looks like there's just so much ready to go. And it could all just go completely out of control. Okay, there is yet another U.S. Navy vessel. The landing ship, the USS Fort McHenry, has transited the Bosphorus and entered the Black Sea. And the official statement is that the ship is there to advance security and stability in Europe. Actually, no, all of this nudging up against Russia is making things very unstable. But Vice Admiral Lisa M. Franchetti, the Sixth Fleet commander, said USS Fort McHenry's arrival reaffirms our collective resolve to Black Sea security and enhances our strong relationships with our NATO allies and partners in the region. I wonder if Russia will give them the Donald Cook treatment here. But this is the first ship sent by the U.S. into the Black Sea since the incident up at the Kerch Strait. This is coming on out of Zero Hedge. So the open question here is, and this is a dock landing vessel, it's rather large, are they going to try and transit the Kerch Strait into the Sea of Azov without asking for Russia's permission? Because remember, Poroshenko is out there saying, yeah, we're going to go. This is freedom of navigation. The Azov Sea doesn't belong to Russia. Well, actually, yeah, it pretty much does. Although Ukraine borders on it as well. But Russia hasn't been doing anything untoward with the Sea of Azov other than maintain safe navigation. But I think going on in there and churning up the Sea of Azov is part of a larger plan to once again sever Crimea from the Russian republics and hot glue it back onto Ukraine, regardless of what the people of Crimea want. Alrighty. Now, as you know, the United States, we're getting into this thing where everybody's starting to arrest everybody else's citizens. So that State Department warning is not without merit. Russia started this one by arresting Paul Whelan, who's a suspected U.S. spy who'd been traveling in Moscow. And apparently the reason they were suspicious of him is he had said, entering the country, he was there just to have some fun, and yet he was not going to fun places. He wasn't hanging out with women. He was hanging out with a lot of men with access to sensitive information, and he was arrested with a flash drive with very sensitive information on it. So now, playing this little tit-for-tat game, the U.S. has arrested a Russian national in the Northern Mariana Islands who is suspected of being an arms dealer. And this all seems to be about trying to unwind back to Maria Butina, who pled guilty to being a Russian agent. Russia is claiming she was coerced. We have no way of knowing if that's true or not. And I'm not going to make a supposition one way or the other. Now, interestingly enough, getting on back to this Paul Whelan, they're trying to portray him as this, this American. He's a former Marine. But apparently he spent more than a decade cultivating friends and contacts in Russia. And apparently he is a citizen of at least 3 other countries, meaning he has multiple passports. So even though they're denying he's a spy, he certainly fits the pattern. In Russia for decades, cultivating friends, multiple passports, yeah, I think so. Now, Russia is getting ready to deploy precision strike missiles in the Western Atlantic. And they're adding Caliber and attack cruise missiles to warships and missile submarines that are already routinely patrolling the Western Atlantic. They're in international waters. They have every right to be there. But we're back to the Cold War. Everybody's parking missiles off of everybody else's coastlines, and all it's going to take is one hothead or one computer software failure to get it all going. I remember when I was a kid in high school physics, and we set up a demonstration of how nuclear fission worked. And all it was is we got a whole bunch of mousetraps, and we set them all, and then we put 2 ping pong balls on each of the bars, and then we threw just one ball in there, which fired off one mousetrap, which sent 2 balls into the air, which hit 2 more mousetraps, which sent 4 balls into the air, until finally all of the traps were firing and there were ping pong balls pretty much everywhere. That's a good demonstration of nuclear fission. It's also a good demonstration of how World War III could spin out of control. So we're coming up here now on a commercial break. We're going to be playing some commercials here, and when we come on back, oh boy, things are heating up down in Venezuela. Are we looking at a coup d'etat down there? And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. And before we get down to Venezuela, there's a story that just crossed my desk here. One of the things that Obama did that I agreed with was to start to normalize relations with Cuba. And first of all, after so many years of the embargo, I mean, we're talking about back to the Bay of Pigs, proving that the CIA knows how to carry a grudge. There was also the issue that as we prepared, or seemed to be preparing to go hostile on Russia, to not allow them to have a base on Cuba the way they did during the last Cold War, which led to the Cuban Missile Crisis. And that was a good reason to sort of welcome Cuba into the warm embrace of the United States of America. And I'm not just saying that because I like Cuban rum and Cuban cigars, or would like to learn how to like Cuban rum and Cuban cigars. But then Trump came on in and was listening to the demons and said, no, we're going to go back to being the hard case on Cuba. And there were all these stories about how U.S. diplomats were being attacked by a Cuban sonic weapon inside the diplomatic facilities until finally they were withdrawn and brought back home. Well, it turns out scientists have analyzed recordings of this strange buzzing sound from the evil Cuban sonic weapon and determined that it is the sound of the Indies short-tailed cricket Anuragorillus cerulnictis. Crickets. That's all it was. It was crickets. Amazing. Okay, so Venezuela. Venezuela's National Assembly, which is controlled by Maduro's opposition, is now saying they reject the legitimacy of his second term. They are now openly calling on the military to restore democracy. In other words, they're calling for a military coup. And the United States, which of course has been trying to get control of Venezuela going all the way back to Hugo Chavez, is hailing the National Assembly as the only legitimate and last remaining democratically elected institution in the country. So we're getting ready for another U.S. overthrow of a country and the imposition of puppet rulership. And Maduro is claiming that the president of the National Assembly, Juan Guaido, is a U.S. agent. He's a puppet created by the U.S. intelligence agencies. That, too, is a repeating pattern. Long before Saddam Hussein became ruler of Iraq, he was a CIA asset inside the government of Iraq, and they just helped move him up the chain of command. That's how these things get done. And don't even get me started about the School of the Americas. And if you don't know what I'm talking about there, it's sometimes nicknamed the School for Dictators. It's where the United States actually trains these puppet rulers that they send out to rule the provinces in the name of the exceptional United States of America. All right, there's the music. We're going to be taking a break here. Come on back with hour number 3 of our show after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And last week we were talking about this strange situation where the U.S. government deployed troops to Gabon in Africa, which is right next door to the Republic of the Congo, which is right now got an Ebola problem. And the story back then was that the U.S. troops were being pre-positioned in case the people of the Congo were unhappy with the results of a recent election, which has not yet been announced. And my concerns were twofold. First of all, the possibility of Americans being exposed to Ebola and returning to the United States before they became symptomatic. My second concern was, how does it come to be that the United States seems concerned that the people of the Congo are not going to like the results of an election before those election results are announced? Well, now it turns out that just a few days after the U.S. troops arrived in Gabon, there's a military coup. And apparently it's still underway. Gee, how did the U.S. know there was going to be a military coup in Gabon? It's just amazing. They must have a crystal ball. The U.S. is building 2 new air bases in Africa, one in Somalia and one in Niger. And Niger Air Base 201 will be a hub for armed drones and other aircraft. Was supposed to be completed this year. It's like everything else done by the government. It's behind schedule and over budget. Apparently, the Airbase 201 will eventually house the U.S. armed drone mission in Niger that is currently operating out of Niger's capital city. All right, an article here on the Saker, and we've seen this coming. The new great game on the roof of the world. And what this has to do is the revelation that there are vast reserves of oil and gas underneath the abyssal plains in the Arctic. And so the countries that border the Arctic are trying to basically say, these are our territorial waters. You know, forget about 12-mile limit and everything else is international. They want to carve up that polar cap. Now, to me, it would make sense that those nations that are near the North Pole, you take their easternmost latitude, rather longitude, their westernmost longitude, and you simply follow them up to the North Pole, and that little pie-shaped piece of the ocean, that's their territorial waters for exploitation. But apparently those nations that don't have the kind of coastlines that say, oh, Canada and the Soviet Union have, are feeling a little bit left out. So now there's a lot of dancing around here. And they're seriously talking about major naval warfare in the Arctic. Now, Russia's going to have the advantage there because they spend a lot of time in the Arctic for commercial purposes. They do a lot of shipping along the northern coast of Russia during the summer and even sometimes during the winter. They build the best icebreakers in the world. Some of them are nuclear powered, and they're amazing ships. But again, it's another fight over another resource-rich area of the world. I have this really radical idea. When you look at the $5 trillion that the United States has already spent on all of these wars all over the world, and just stop for a moment and think, had that $5 trillion been put into a project to develop alternative sources of energy, for example, clean fusion power that would in turn use electrolysis to separate ocean water from hydrogen from oxygen. Just let the oxygen go up in the air so we can all breathe. The hydrogen is used as a fuel. It only cost $100 billion to go to the moon. $5 trillion. Just think what could have been accomplished with that in pure research, especially with international cooperation. But no, let's just go on out and just club each other to death here because there's nothing in man's industry but his greed and his sloth. His heart is in his weapons. We want to have weapons because it makes us feel good. We get excited. We get tumescent. We're, look at this gun. I got a really big gun. As opposed to the guy in the white lab coat. I have a test tube. I got a test tube here, and it's really interesting. Getting into the economic news, the national debt rose to $21.974 trillion at the end of 2018. Public debt increased to 78% of the gross domestic product at the end of 2018, the highest percentage since 1950. That's before I was born, and I'm an old guy. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. One of the big areas where our economy is in serious trouble is student loan debt, which now stands at an aggregate of $1.2 trillion with a T. And it is crippling the economy. It is crippling these students. Higher education got turned into a racket. In my day, you went to college, you learned electronic engineering, or you learned math, or you learned something that would get you a high-paying job. Today, you go to college and you get women's studies and transgender studies and art history, and various other things. And you're lured to college with the promise that whatever your major is, whatever you study, whatever snowflake curriculum you decide for yourself, there will be a high-paying job waiting for you after graduation. So go on and just borrow all the money you need to go to school and have a really good time. And then, of course, these people are graduating. The jobs are not there. How many art history majors can one society absorb? And even those who studied engineering and computer science and so forth, they're having trouble because all those jobs are getting offshored to other countries. And so now they're stuck. They have a degree and they have a huge student loan debt, and they're having to work in fast food restaurants trying to pay it off. And many of them are having to stay at home. They can't move away from home. You know, but the bankers got that debt hook into them good and hard, and that's all that really counts. That's what the whole exercise was for, because, you know, good debt makes for a good slave. Now, Generation Z appears to have learned from the millennials, and college enrollments are way, way down. And it's basically the pushback. Generation Z is going to be a very pragmatic, practical population. I mean, millennials turn their noses up at the idea of fixing somebody's toilet or installing an elevator or cleaning patients' teeth. Instead, they wanted majors in lesbian dance, theory, gender studies, and how white people and Western civilization destroyed the world, which they can't get a job doing. So Generation Z has learned from that. They're going right out into the world. And economists have already shown people who enter the labor market right out of high school are generally much better off economically than the average college graduate today. All righty, we have a caller on the line. Al in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I liked what you said about that $5 trillion that I guess the United States has spent on war. I kind of think that number's a little low, but I think it's probably a lot higher.
That's just on the last war since Afghanistan. It's not taking into account what they spent on World War I or World War II or Vietnam or any of these others.
Yeah, I'm suspecting that's going to get close to your national debt at that point. You know, Mike, when you were saying that, I mean, two things hit me. Was one, you know, that number is probably low, and then that David Rothschild tweet about telling Donald Trump to, you know, shut the blah 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 up. You know, these are the people that are actually running the world, and they don't want competition. Obviously, right?
Yeah.
I don't really understand their logic. They want destruction, and you know, they just want control, and they're using governments and the taxpayer to do it for them. That's what it seems to me. They don't really have much skin in the game per se, other than they can crash the market. You know what? From that tweet that David Rockefeller put out, it sounds to me like that's exactly what has to happen in order to stop these fiends. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. I absolutely agree. I mean, as long as the control of the money supply is in private hands, we are their slaves. And that's exactly why they set it up. The private central banks are not about money. They're not about economy. They're not about helping the nation and its people. It is about enslaving governments and enslaving people to the masters, the bankers. And again, going back to the history of the French Revolution, before the nobility and Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI got their trips to the guillotine, the French Revolution targeted the bankers because they understood who were the grassroots level tools of the oppressors. It was the banks.
Yeah. Marianne Le Pen also knew that as well.
Yes.
You know, just from what I read about her, and of course, you know, she was picked up and she had some psychiatric exam done via the state, if I'm not mistaken. I think I read that on your website.
Yeah, they did that just to discredit her.
Well,
It's an old trick the Soviet Union used to use. If there was somebody who was out there that challenged the status quo and people were starting to listen to them, put them in a nut house. They're insane. Everything they said was insane, and it was a way of basically disconnecting them from society. And that's exactly what they did to Marine Le Pen.
Yes, they're doing it in incrementally, but they're also kind of doing it to everyone with the social media, and in China they have that social credit score.
Yeah,
I heard that that's moving elsewhere, and it's all when you really think about how things really are and what's going on in the world, it's not hard to see what the end game is. I mean, we know what the end game is. You've been talking about it for years. And I wish people, would just smarten up, cut up their credit cards, get out of debt. I mean, I don't even care if they pay off the credit cards, Mike, because it'd be better if they didn't. They're not legally, is responsible to pay off credit cards. And that would crash the system even quicker.
Well,
and it would be
I'm not, I think it's better that you try and pay off your credit cards. And the way you do that is you live a more austere life. You don't buy fancy clothes, you don't take expensive vacations, you don't drive expensive cars. Just every penny that comes into your hand goes down on those loans and credit cards to just try and pay them all off. Because when the crash comes, if you read those little credit card and loan contracts, your creditor has the right to come in and demand the full outstanding balance right there and then. For example, if you still owe, $40,000 on your house, they're going to come on in and say, we want the $40,000. And you're going to say, I don't have that. And they're going to say, well, that's fine. We're going to take the house. So it's going to get very, very ugly. We've seen these abuses before. We saw them during the crash in 1929. It's the way the bankers like to operate. Have you ever seen the classic melodrama where the villain's got the black cape and the black top hat and the mustache, and he's always in there screaming about, the mortgage, the mortgage. Well, that stereotypical image is based on a very harsh reality of what was going on during many times of this country's history. We talk about the Great Depression. It wasn't the only one. There's always been this cycle of growth and contraction, growth and contraction. It's like a giant heartbeat that pumps the real wealth of the nation and its people into the pockets of the bankers.
Yeah, and eventually into the pockets of the rich people.
Yes.
I wasn't saying, people shouldn't pay their bills. I'm just saying, cut them up, cut up those credit cards, get out of debt. Just get out of debt, because it's easier to save than it is to pay interest-bearing debt.
Absolutely.
A lot easier.
Absolutely.
And, I haven't been in debt, and I'm going on 3 decades now, because when I was younger, I was really foolish. I should let you go, Mike. I should not have said that. I'm sorry.
Well, you shouldn't have. Thank you for catching yourself on there. I don't think you got to the second syllable here. But before you go, you're talking about it. Brought back a memory. In my last year of college, as we were getting closer to the end of the year, there were actually tables that were set up on the quad by credit card companies, where they were just getting the students to come on in and just sign them on up, get them onto that plastic just as quickly as they could.
Yep, get them onto the interest-paying gravy train.
Yep.
Anyway, Mike, I'm sorry I let that slip. But when I was young, I was a little foolish, when it came to cash. I think a lot of people were.
Yeah.
I think it comes in and forever, right? And then the economy starts to change and things change, and, you get older and you break down, and now you're not, it's an old story. Thanks a lot for your time, Mike. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks an awful lot, Al. Well, if you really think about it, our society encourages people to be foolish with their money, because that makes it easier for them to be looted by credit card companies, by, the banks, by mass marketing campaigns. The people who are at the top of these corporations and government, all you are to them is a money machine, or secondarily to breed new workers and new soldiers. But that's it. It's getting the money out of you. That's all they really care about. And you can see that from the fact that so many dangerous, bad products are being marketed to us today. And as long as they make money, that's all that really matters. So people are getting sick and people are dying. Yeah, there's too many people out there anyway. All right, let's grab another phone call here. Gary in Arkansas, rather. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, about credit cards. I don't have a credit card. I have a debit card. So if the money's not in the bank, you don't buy anything. But I had a friend of mine that had, about, I don't know, somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 on his credit card. And I had him, they turned it over for collection. I said, let it go into collection. And when it went into collection, they talked to him, and then he said, here's my financial advisor. And so I got on the phone, and I explained to them they've got no skin in the game, that there's no contract between the credit card company or this collection company and my friend. And if you don't believe me, you better get a hold of your supervisor. So he did and called back. And he said, man, where did this guy get all this information he had? He's exactly right.
Okay,
so
well, Gary, you know, I don't want to have bad information or bad recommendations going out over this radio show. There doesn't have to be a contractual arrangement between the credit card company and the collection agency. The collection agency literally buys the debt from the credit card company. And at that point, the credit card company is done with that.
I understand that, but it's not legal, and they went away.
I think that's bad advice here. In any event, if you have any plans for the future, you do want to try and maintain good credit. Just don't get reckless with it. Gary, we got to let you go and take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And still talking about the economic news. Sears Holding Corporation is readying plans for a liquidation after Chairman Lampert's bid to pull approximately 425 stores out of bankruptcy was rejected. Lampert offered a $4.6 billion package backed by lenders, Bank of America and Citigroup, as well as a new participant in the deal, the Royal Bank of Canada. And the three institutions offered to provide a $950 million asset-backed loan and a $350 million revolving line of credit to back Lampert's bid, which would have secured the jobs of roughly 50,000 workers out of the company's current 68,000. But apparently, according to Bloomberg, there were gaps in Lampert's financing package, and the plan would not have provided enough cash to cover the bankruptcy-related cost. It also undervalued inventory and other assets compared to what liquidators were promising to pay. So it looks like another iconic, historic indeed, American retailer is about to bite the dust. And they're going to point their fingers at online retailers and, oh, it's this fault and that fault, and they changed the highway. It's a very simple fact. We, the consumers, can't consume anymore. We don't have that kind of money. We live in a society where whatever wages and salaries we can trade our labor for are just barely enough to feed our families with and keep a roof over our head. We don't have anything left over. The numbers are coming in from the last holiday shopping season, and despite all those early assurances, you know, right after Black Friday, when the corporate media was saying, oh, it's going to be a great shopping season, get on down there and start buying before all the good things are gone. It was not good at all. And Sears may not be the only iconic retailer we're going to lose this year. I'm having a hard time figuring out what's going on with our foreign policy toward China. Or maybe what we're seeing is a repeat of what's going on with Syria. Trump is trying to do one thing, and the people around him are taking it upon themselves to do something else. Because there's a U.S. delegation led by senior trade officials. They've arrived in Beijing earlier today to begin the first round of in-person talks to resolve the U.S.-China trade war. But at the same time, the U.S. has carried out its latest freedom of navigation operation in the South China Sea. At least this time there wasn't a near collision with a Chinese ship. So on one hand, you're there trying to get China to cooperate with U.S. trade policy, and at the same time, you're poking the dragon in the South China Sea along with Taiwan, because the U.S. is out there openly supporting Taiwan's independence, and China does not like that as well. In fact, Xi Jinping's Taiwan comments are seen as likely to scuttle the talks. So basically, on a speech last Wednesday to mark the 40th anniversary of Beijing's call to end military confrontation across the Taiwan Strait, Xi Jinping said the two sides should begin talks on reunification. Taiwan is saying, no way, not going to happen. 3 ex-Credit Suisse bankers and an ex-minister have been arrested over a $2 billion loan fraud. This was a large-scale credit fraud that ruined the economy of Mozambique in 2016. See, this is how bankers think. So what if we wreck a country? So what if all the people are in starvation? We got rich, and that's all that really matters. I understand Wolf of Wall Street is going to be coming back onto the cable box real soon, so you might want to watch it. If it's the unedited version, you might want the kids to not be in the room. But these 3 former Credit Suisse group bankers were arrested in London in connection with a loan fraud scheme that wrecked the economy of Mozambique, according to UK authorities. Andrew Pierce, 49, Surjan Singh, 44, and Datalina Sabiva, 37, have been charged in a federal court in Brooklyn, New York, and the U.S. is now seeking extradition of the 3. The trio are currently out on bail. I hope the British authorities at least told them to surrender their passports. But people who've got that kind of money, they have ways. Alrighty, let's see. Okay, heavy truck orders have tumbled 43% to a 2-year low. By that, we're talking about the Class 8 vehicles, the big 18-wheelers, the long-haul heavy lift trucks. And if people aren't ordering new trucks, it means they don't have anything to ship. That's another bad indicator. We're going to take a break for phone calls, for commercials. We've got another caller waiting on the line after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we've got callers waiting on the line. Let's start with John in Arkansas. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Mike. Hey, I'm the one that called you in about a month ago talking about that woman in Georgia who accepted prison PAC money, and I sent you an email. I don't know if you got it or not.
I think I recall getting that one, yes.
Yeah, well, I want to talk to you about, everybody on the RBN show always talking about Israel this, Israel that. I got a guest for you, Mike, from Israel. She was on my show.
I did get that. Yes, I did get that email. And I sent you a reply.
Thank you! I love you forever now. You won't regret it, Mike.
All right, I'll look into it. I do want to start having more guests on the program here, and Claire's actually offered to step on in and become my show booker in her copious amounts of free time.
Okay. But I want to just reiterate, another RBN host we won't name turned her down. Don't want to hear nothing she got to say.
Well, I'm not
I'll
making
see
any
you simple
promises.
myself.
I mean, I have to look into this person and what they've got to say here. Even though I want to have more guests, doesn't mean I'm going to let just anybody onto the microphone here until I find out more about them.
Understood.
Okay, so John,
Understood.
thanks an awful lot for the contact. I am looking at it, and let's switch over to Jim in Ohio. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, Mike, I heard your comment about Taiwan, and I'm sure you're well aware of the history of Taiwan and how Chiang Kai-shek had to be exiled to Formosa after World War II when our military establishment helped Mao take over China.
Yes.
So since our government's been complicit in the expansion of communism worldwide, why would they want to maintain a independent Taiwan? In other words, that's like a playing card they have to use at a later time, or what's the deal?
No, it's about who's controlling those waters in the Western Pacific. If Taiwan reunifies with China, then China has a solid lock on all of the waters in that area. If Taiwan is independent, then China's influence in the maritime area is greatly reduced. And if Taiwan is aligned with the United States of America, then the U.S. can effectively project maritime power to the Western Pacific and have more control over the sea lanes of communication.
But the U.S. policy has enabled China to become a financial powerhouse. So, in other words, they've put them in the position to dominate that region. So,
No, U.S.
are they going to back out, or
I think it would be more accurate to say that. I think it would be more accurate to say that U.S. policy failures allowed China to become the powerhouse that it is. In particular, the abandonment of our manufacturing and the offshoring of our jobs. China, if you look at China's history going back thousands of years, they're innovative, they like to build things, and they're a manufacturing powerhouse. Now, the U.S. didn't say, we're going to make China this very wealthy manufacturing powerhouse. What U.S. policy, very short-sighted, did was to say, well, we, the United States, we have control of the world's global currency, so we don't need to worry about manufacturing or anything like that. But as more and more countries turn away from using the U.S. dollar, it's reaching a crisis point. And that's why we've got people over at the Pentagon out there saying, the big problem is China, because yes, China right now is an economic threat to the United States. It's a big part of this whole trade war situation, which may be another reason why we're seeing this almost Jekyll and Hyde schizophrenic attitude of trying to talk to China about ending the trade war at the same time they're supporting Taiwanese independence and sending ships and airplanes through those islands in the South China Sea.
well, in other words, your theory is that our government has been a failure in their policies, but you give them the benefit of the doubt that they're working for the best interests of our country, where I take the position that this was all planned, and they're not that stupid. They know what the results of their actions are going to be. They didn't get to be in positions of power by being stupid. So, I think it was planned.
I think there were plans. There are always plans, but the plans don't work out. And I think what the situation is that a lot of these people who are in these positions of powers, they're doing what is in their own best personal interest, not that of the country and the American people. What they want to do is basically get everything working to make themselves more wealthy and more powerful. But sometimes it breaks down. And I think that's what's happened here, is that all the planning that the U.S. And don't forget, the U.S. government is not a monolithic, unified structure. What just happened in Syria with Bolton and Pompeo and Jeffrey versus Trump is showing that. Our government is badly, badly factionalized. And so you're going to have this one group over here that's got this agenda relative to China. You're going to have this other group over here that has a different agenda relative to China. And from that, we're seeing this schizophrenic behavior. But without a unified foreign policy, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to accomplish anything positive, which is why we do seem to be headed to a period of open conflict with China.
I just saw a video on YouTube that there's actually a mass exodus of Westerners from China because China is making it more difficult for Westerners to obtain a visa there. And these are people that have married into the Chinese society and that are heavily invested in businesses there. So, there's a purge going on right now.
Well, that's what we're being told. But again, we need to be very, very careful, because you go back and look at the history of every time the United States wanted to go after some kind of a nation preceding the hostilities, there was always propaganda to demonize them, to make them look like they were bad people, to seduce the American public into saying, well, yeah, I'm opposed to war, but really, they kind of deserve it. We saw that kind of demonization of Germany, both before World War I and World War II. We saw that kind of demonization of Japan before World War II. We saw that kind of demonization about Assad before going into Syria. And if they're really thinking about a confrontation with China, we can expect all kinds of negative propaganda about China, just as we're seeing negative propaganda about Russia. You have to be a very critical thinker and ask, does this really make sense? Would China adopt a policy that's going to drive Westerners, many of whom are key players in their growing industries, out of the country? One of the reasons China has become a manufacturing powerhouse is they have succeeded in luring a lot of American engineers and manufacturing experts to move to China, because there was no place for them to really do what they did here in the United States.
Well, I understand that, but you still have the same regime in power that murdered 60 million of its citizens to maintain their power. So,
I think that happened. I think that happened before the current government was even alive. Again, we have to be very, very careful. And you know something? Governments can change their mind about stuff. They can decide, hey, murdering our own people was a bad thing to do. We need the labor force. I mean, China just recently rescinded the one-child policy or two-child policy, and because they need more workers. And yes, there's a lot of robotics, but there's a lot of things robots won't do. Anyway, listen, Jim, we're going to let you go, and thank you very much for the phone call. All righty. Now, end of this month, the price of a forever stamp, the first-class postage, will rise from 50 cents to 55 cents. And this despite the rather abysmal quality of the Postal Service. And for somebody of my age, it's a bit of a shock. Because I remember when I was a kid, the price of a first-class stamp was just pennies. Just pennies here. Now, outgoing Democratic California Governor Jerry Brown, Governor Moonbeam is finally fading into history, basically came on out declaring that Officer Ronald Singh's death had nothing to do with the state's sanctuary laws, even though, of course, that Corporal Singh had been killed by an illegal immigrant who had been shielded from federal immigration authorities by California's SB 54. But Brown is out there saying, oh, no, had nothing to do with it. Just trust us, had nothing to do with it, because if we'd been allowing immigration to do their job, this guy would still have been there, and he still would have shot the police officer. It's just no difference at all. They're still trying to protect that open borders situation as more and more people gets very, very angry about this. You want to talk about a difference, okay? Germany, which was leading the way for mass migration to Europe, has now started a program to bribe these migrants to go back home. And they're basically, the campaign is called Your Country, Your Future Now. And they've got billboards in 7 languages across 2,500 locations across 80 German cities. And the deal is, if these migrants will go back to their home countries, Germany will pay their rent for the first year they're back home. So what a hugely expensive experiment this has been for the taxpayers of Germany, to first have the migrants flood on in, cause all kinds of mayhem, crime, destruction, living off the social net, and now they're going to have to pay to get them to go back home. Think of how much money would have been saved if the borders would have been kept closed. George. So that's where Angela Merkel's policy has led. Let them all in, let them trash the place, get all kinds of free stuff. Now they're going to pay them to leave. Over in Great Britain, another illegal migrant who was a suspected drug dealer, cocaine and heroin, was caught roving the streets with an axe and a meat cleaver. Apparently this guy, a 25-year-old Albanian, was arrested on suspicion of drug trafficking back in April. And police released this guy without charge pending investigation and lost track of him, despite his status as an illegal migrant who was not supposed to be allowed to stay in the country. How's this all working out for you? So they basically found him wandering around the streets with an axe and a meat cleaver. That's what open borders has brought. Okay, a lot of people got caught up in this. It turned out to be a huge embarrassment, and it began with this tragic, deadly shooting of a 7-year-old Jasmine Barnes. And she was this poor girl down in Houston. She was shot dead. And somebody came on out there and said the main suspect is a white supremacist. And the media went nuts. Even some of the independent media got caught up on this. Basically would say, oh, white supremacist murders black 7-year-old Houston girl, and everybody just went totally nuts with it. It turned out it was 2 black guys shooting into this car full of girls. Well, it's still shocking, right? We should still be outraged. No, everybody's kind of going silent on this one. Because we're only interested when we've got a white killer against a black victim, because that we can exploit, that we can use to fan the flames of racism and get some good riots going. We don't want to report on black crime. That's not newsworthy. Who cares? Let's go and find out what's Kim Kardashian doing right now. Don't give me this black on black crime here. Down in Virginia, their Democratic governor has unveiled a new anti-gun package targeting citizens' rights. And these are the most radical gun control proposals the state has ever seen. It includes their version of the red flag law, which is what they're calling, they call it an extreme risk protection order, which allows police to take away a person's guns without due process. And unfortunately, in enforcing it, they've already killed some gun owners. Now, groups like Gun Owners of America call these laws gun confiscation orders. Police go to a secret court to get the order. The gun owner is not present. He's not even aware the police are seeking the authority to take away the guns. And the burden of proof for one of these emergency risk protection orders is low. All that needs to happen is a neighbor or a family member to decide to go to the police and say, I think this gun owner is a threat to themselves or others. And it's going to cost the gun owner thousands of dollars in legal fees to try and get his gun back and restore his constitutionally protected right. Now think how this can be abused. Let's say this guy who's a gun collector and he's peaceful and law-abiding, and he's got a girlfriend, and they have an argument and they break up. And in a fit of pique, she goes to the police station and say, oh, he's talking about taking his guns and shooting up a school. And the police go and take this guy's gun collection. Without due process, these kind of abuses are going to happen. I guarantee it. It will be there. Ex-wives, somebody, you win the young lady away from some other guy, and the guy goes and says he's a gun nut. You're handing the means to inflict damage on law-abiding gun owners to people who are not gun owners themselves or who could care less. It's just another way to harm those they have a beef with impunity. All right, we're coming up here on another commercial break. We're going to be back with our last segment after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today, we're going to get a look at human-caused global warming because, my goodness, it is definitely global warming out there. They had the first international extreme marathon race in Russia's Oymyakon. The temperature was at 52 degrees below zero Celsius. That is cold. Moderate to heavy snow heading into the Northland. This is in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and a winter weather advisory is coming on in. It is really heavy over in Europe. They've got a winter storm. It lasted an entire week. It's brought massive amounts of snow, with southern Germany and Austria getting slammed with the greatest amounts. Apparently it's causing accidents. One person was killed when a vehicle skidded on a slick road and struck another near the town of Bad Tolls. A woman was part of a group visiting Teisenberg Mountain, was killed in an avalanche. Now, there was a huge avalanche that literally reached from Germany into Italy, and that one killed 7 people. Apparently, heavy snow has stranded 2,000 travelers at the airport in Hokkaido, Japan. So it's really heavy over there. So it's definitely here. My goodness, off in the distance, I can hear Al Gore wailing. Now, one of the points that the global warming people were always pushing was that there had never been such a rapid acceleration of temperature in Earth's history. Well, as it turns out, researchers at the Friedrich Alexander Universität Erlangen-Nuremberg in the latest edition of the journal Nature Communications, basically saying that temperature changes today are no more rapid or slow than they were millions of years ago. But then that's how the global warming scam got going. Politicians saw something that was happening naturally. They declared it a crisis, and then they offered to sell you a solution. And back in the 1990s, when this whole thing got started, the Earth was in a warming cycle. And so they came up with this human-caused global warming, and they got lots of money, and they got the media on board, and they're out there pushing for carbon tax and a global environmental authority. Then Mother Nature fooled them. At the end of the 1990s, the temperature started to drop, and rather than say, oh, the problem is solved, we can go back and do something else, no, they kept it going, and they covered up the fact that the Earth was cooling. That's where hide the decline came from. You want to talk about a big con job? Anybody who says there's no such thing as a wide-ranging conspiracy to defraud ordinary people, we've got one. Staked out on the ground, naked for you to study and learn from. It was all the government agencies, Al Gore, corporate media, who all got together and said, we're going to scare the people of planet Earth that their activities are broiling the world, and we will get them to give us their money for carbon taxes, and we will trick them into letting us tell them how to live their lives so that they will agree to live with less so that we can have more. We've heard that refrain before, haven't we? All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure that he's got lots and lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here and share it with everybody that you know. Talk to them face to face. Bring back the art of the conversation. Postal mail, email, stay off of social media. They're filtering everything right now. Now they're going after pro-gun activists. to filter them and deplatform them. Anyway, please donate. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.